On this week's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we actually won a game against the Bears. We'll break it all down. We'll get fans ready for our next matchup against the Green Bay Packers. We will discuss the quarterback situation now with the injury to Carson Wentz, and we will finish up with a new segment called Resign or Decline. So stick around and let's get this show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the Going Commando podcast. My name is Clark. I'm joined by my co-hosts Chris and Tom. And ladies and gentlemen, the Washington Commanders are back in the win column. Whether you call that a win or not, a win is a win.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you look at this game, you think it's a little sloppy, and you look at it on paper, and it is definitely a sloppy game. I mean, when you're talking about one touchdown coming from Brian Robinson, great to see that happening, obviously. But when it's your only touchdown, you have a lot of questions about what the offensive coordinator is doing, how Carson was doing during the game before we realized that he has a thumb injury, or is it a ring finger injury? He has some sort of throwing injury on his right hand. So, can't be mad at it, but we also got to temper that with the expectation that we were going to fire our coaches if we had lost. So, great game for Ron Rivera in terms of just winning over the fans with just a small win. Hopefully he can continue it.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously happy to get a win. I think this is a game where the defense carried us, and this is the only two wins this season. The defense has carried us, in my opinion, to those wins. I disagree. I think this was another bad game for Rivera. I think Rivera kind of lucked into this win. I don't think he really did anything to attribute to this win. There's a lot of coaching mistakes yet again that I saw out of this Rivera and this coaching staff. I mean, I'll take the win. But this is going to be similar to some games last year where it's just a low scoring win that Rivera will over exaggerate as being actually good.
I think that calling this game sloppy really doesn't do it justice. This game was not sloppy at all. It was just awful to watch. I think calling it sloppy is not the right term, just based off what we saw. I mean, we had two offensive touchdowns, one of which was a questionable catch by the Chicago receiver. Maybe looked like he possibly bobbled it, but who really knows? And the other one was like a 1-yard touchdown from Robinson in a game. And then, of course, like you go for two, you don't get it to make it 12 points, which is just even more icing on the cake for just a weird and just terrible football game. But at the end of the day, it is a win in the win column. It's a game that I believe all of us probably had us winning going into the season, but just it didn't really feel like too much of a win. I agree more with Chris on this one. Like, yes, it's a win, and yes, it prevents us from going 1-5, but you really went toe to toe with Justin Fields, who can't even, struggles to complete a pass down the field. And it overall was just a very sloppy game, and certainly many, many questions moving forward still.
It's a fair assessment, honestly, of the game. I think that Justin Fields really kept them in the game for the Bears. Neither team looked great here. Like, I have to agree with you there. Now, where Ron Rivera does get credit is that defense continued to look somewhat good. I mean, Rashad Wildgoose out there making a lot of plays. Cole Holcomb having a big week again. Sacks all along the line, especially with Jonathan Allen and Montez Sweat. It's continuing to look like something good defensively. Now, offensively is where you start to find the issues. And that's a really hard thing because I don't think you can pin as much of this as Ron Rivera as you can Scott Turner. Ron Rivera feels like a guy that micromanages to me. Like whenever they show him on the sideline, he's not talking. He's just making a very stern look towards whatever official or player he's looking at the time. But I never see his mouth moving. He's very much a micromanager, in my opinion. You'll see Scott Turner down there freaking on all fours, begging to God that the ball gets past the 10-yard line. But, Ron Rivera is not that guy. So is that an issue? I don't know. I think a lot of head coaches do that and delegate to their coordinators. But at the same time, like, how much can we really put on him when it's Scott Turner that's running the offense?
Well, let's go over the positives from the game first, because I think that's a little bit of shorter of a list, and then we can touch on some of the negatives. You mentioned it earlier, Tom. The D line was certainly getting to Fields. I mean, if you remember, there was several times where Fields was extremely slow to get up off the field. Our boys would hit him. Whether actually through a sack or just a QB hit or a pressure or what have you, but he was definitely taking some shots and was definitely not feeling good the next day. But yeah, Allen, James Williams was actually showing some pressure there. He looked all right. I know Payne maybe walked away with a little banged up, so hopefully he'll be good to go come Sunday. Defense, Wild Goose, unleash the goose. He looks pretty good. You also had a F.A. Obata sack in there, another sneaky F.A. Obata sack. Seems like he's been doing that, every other game here. And then I would like to call out the Carson Wentz crack block, where he wrecked Roquan Smith, I believe, and possibly, move to tight end for Carson. Is that on the horizon? I maybe now that he's kind of banged up and on the injury list for the next few weeks here, we might not get to see any more big blocks out of him for a little bit, but that was cool to see as well. And that's pretty much all I got, fellas, for the positives.
Hey man, well, if our boy Taylor Heinicke comes in, starts throwing the lights out, maybe they do a little 2 QB system, have Wentz come in to throw those devastating blocks.
Maybe they do a triple option where they hand it from Wentz to Heinicke to Gibson, and it somehow works out with Scott Turner freaking just running the offense.
Well, at this point, Scott Turner should be trying everything and anything to try to keep his job. So if that's what it takes, man,
Agreed.
Go try it. I mean, seen some maybe decent play calling out of him in some spots, but then overall it's been pretty underwhelming. But yeah, I mean, there definitely are things to take away. Whenever you win a football game, there's going to be positives, and I think Brian Robinson did start to get his legs under him a little bit. His stats weren't exactly super eye popping, but he was effective and he scored the game-winning touchdown. He was picking up yards when he needed to. So, he improved from his last performance against the Titans. That's definitely another thing that we'll have to keep monitoring as the season goes on, is his progression.
And another thing on Brian Robinson, I think I will say they did a little bit better job of keeping Gibson relevant in this game and having Gibson, still get carries and touches. I think that's going to be key. I think having one guy in there for the majority of the game is not how we're going to win. And then I did want to call out the Jonathan Allen interception. I believe it was his first career interception. I know it was like tipped by F.A. Obata or someone, and it was honestly probably Justin Fields' fault. For throwing it basically into the lineman's face to begin with. But I will say that was cool to see. Always like to see my boy Jonathan Allen, get recording some career stats there.
Yeah, I would say my final positive here was actually, this is gonna be a weird one, but Joey Sly, our kicker, actually had his most attempts this season so far with 3. And listen, if you're trying for points, I like it. So he made 2 of them. He missed his first one of the season. He had a long of 38, and he was 6 of the points, which if you didn't have him in that game, you lose the game. So great game for Joey Sly. I hope that he continues to make them. I hope he doesn't dwell on the miss. And I think that there's a lot of negatives that we should talk about possibly.
Right into those negatives, because I definitely have a lot of them. Well, for starters, we had 12 men on the field multiple times and then 10 men on the field another time. This is the same, Rivera bullshit that we see each and every week, where he just continues to make mental coaching mistake errors, and there's no one that you can point the figure out other than him for these mistakes. And I don't know, if we're just going to keep, letting it slide and just saying, oh, he's getting better each and every week. I don't really see it. I think I keep seeing the continuous coaching errors that are very simple things that are easy to fix, and the good coaches in this league don't do them.
Yeah, I would say my biggest negative, and I definitely agree with your views, Chris. I mean, the penalties are one of our biggest issues so far. I would say our other biggest issue is our offensive line. I mean, when you have a running back like Brian Robinson averaging 3.5, I mean, we know that he's a guy that can go and pick up yards. I really do believe our offensive line just isn't getting the push at times that he needs to really create those yards and get that separation and get into the secondary like a good running back should. At the same time, it bothers me because I want to say Scott Turner is the biggest negative of this entire game, because you have a quarterback like Carson Wentz and then you only throw 22 passes. Now, I understand that's because of the actual amount of downs you have, but you run the ball. I believe I have it down here as 28 times. That's a lot, especially when you're not necessarily picking up yards as well as you should. I think you should open up the passing game. I mean, Terry McLaurin was still our lead receiver, but he only had 3 receptions, and that's really that's bad. You want your lead receiver to be getting 7 balls a game at least. So, a lot of negatives on the offensive side for me, and I'm hoping that Heinicke can fix those. But I also don't believe in him. So.
I absolutely agree, Tom. I mean, the offense was stalling all game and it kept going 3 and out, at least at the start for sure. Very, consecutively 3 and out, 3 and out. It's sad because our defense was doing a good job. I mean, they were, like we said earlier, they're getting to fields. It was almost like Trevor Siemian season there for a second, because of how much we were just pouring the heat on Fields there with the D line. But there's just a lot of lackluster performance from the O-line, like you mentioned, Tom, but also just some bad self-inflicted wounds. Curtis Samuel had a very bad drop at one point in the game, which would have been an easy touchdown. He needs to have that. Joey Sly needs to be, on point. He needs to be making kicks like that. Carson Wentz, almost looked like he almost rolled his ankle, a self-inflicted ankle roll on a designed QB run. It looked very klutzy. Bobby McCain, I'd like to mention again. He yet again just whiffs on every tackle and gives up massive scrambles. When players kind of come his way. So again, poor performance from him. Would like to note we did not see any William Jackson III at all in this game, if I'm correct. I don't recall seeing him at all. I think he's been benched, and if I actually recall, I saw earlier in last week or maybe earlier this week, he actually wants out of Washington, and I'd be totally fine with that. He's been nothing but a detriment overall to the defense since coming here, and if we can get any sort of capital or talent maybe in return for him, if anyone's willing to take him off our hands and take his hefty contract off our hands, I'd be all for that.
I think we have to mention that Carson Wentz designed run call again before we get back to this talk of William Jackson. I think we all were probably scratching our heads at the time, and now that we're learning of Wentz's injuries, of course, he got injured on that play. His hand was injured. He had a shoulder or something with his muscle and his throwing arm injury, and we're running a designed QB run for our non-mobile quarterback at the goal line. That might have just been smart. That might have just been Scott Turner just saying, "Hey, I dare you guys to fire me. Watch this. Like, you think this has been bad? Check out this Carson Wentz designed run." I just couldn't have not mentioned that. I mean, come on, guys.
Well, yeah, and one interesting thought I had on this actually, and it's funny that you bring up Carson Wentz. Like, there's this idea of the team adopting the identity of the starting quarterback. And I think Carson Wentz's identity has been Jekyll and Hyde. Like, he plays hot and he plays cold, and you don't know which one you're getting on any given day. Now, does that change with Heinicke behind command? I have no clue, but this team has really been Jekyll and Hyde this entire season. The defensive line has looked amazing. The offensive line has looked terrible. The receivers and the running backs for the Commanders have looked great. The secondary has looked terrible. The quarterback and the middle linebacker are only the 2 positions that kind of look similar, where they've been lackluster and then they've been great at times. So, very interesting team.
Yeah, that's something I kind of wanted to mention is we haven't seen Jahan Dotson the last 2 weeks. And obviously our offense in this game against the Bears was very stagnant, and they only scored about 17 points, I believe, against Tennessee. So, maybe having another big playmaking receiver guy like that to, make something happen in a game is really more important to this offense than we would have imagined. And, we would hope to get him back soon.
Yeah, and you say to Jahan Dotson, just a quick note, he has re-aggravated his hamstring injury in practice today. He left early, but he is still hoping to return for the game on Sunday.
I do hope we get Jahan back, as quickly as possible, whether that's this Sunday or the following week or two. Definitely think he's a critical playmaker on this team and can really help us. But I think I'm not too worried. We have guys, De'Ami Brown has shown he can step up and kind of fill that gap. And we still got, good old Cam Sims as well as of course, the tandem of Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin. So I'm not too worried about having him come back. I would rather have him be 100% and come back than come back, 75, 60, 80% or what have you. I think it's really just Wentz has shown us he can't get it done in the red zone, just can't get it done. And I think, Heinicke kind of transitioning to looking at Green Bay and this game on Sunday. I think Heinicke is a guy that has a much different style of QB play that I think works better in the style of offense that Scott Turner is trying to do, or at least, is shown to be capable of doing. So we'll see. I think, Heinicke, at least for starters, gives you a lot more ability to escape out of the pocket. I mean, we've seen Carson Wentz look like a freaking statue back there through all these games, taking sack after sack, not stepping up into the pocket, looking kind of like a klutz, like I said earlier back there. I think Heinicke gives us a little bit more of an edge on that front.
So let's get right into it then. Of course, the biggest news, or well, not the biggest, there's a lot of big news coming out of Washington this week, but one of the bigger stories, of course, is Carson Wentz needing hand surgery. He'll be out 4 to 6 weeks approximately based on the injury. And so with that being said, our old friend Taylor Heinicke, Tom's favorite quarterback in the NFL, will be back in command to lead the Washington Commanders for the foreseeable future. So let's talk about it, guys. What do you think? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit there, Chris, about kind of his playmaking ability, and he's a bit more of an elusive guy than Wentz, but how do you think that this shakes out with, some new offensive pieces around Heinicke that he didn't have last year?
Well, I think first off, new offensive pieces is correct. I think Heinicke is the third guy in the depth chart. I think that honestly we could cut him and it wouldn't make a difference. He's a very, like, whenever he is our starter in the quarterback rankings, he's number 32. Like, let's not make any ifs, ands, or buts about this.
I'll make an if and or but about it, Tom.
I will too.
But and to continue my point, when you don't have Logan Thomas, who hasn't practiced this week, didn't play last game, when you don't have Jahan Dotson, who re-aggravated his injury, as I said earlier, when you have a Terry McLaurin that's only catching 3 balls a game, when you have a guy like Brian Robinson, who, listen, he got a touchdown, but he only ran for 60 yards on 17 carries. That's not astounding numbers. I just don't trust Heinicke. That's the bottom line. I don't like him. I don't trust him.
I trust Heinicke more than I trust Wentz in this offense that we kind of run here. If I'm just being honest, I think he showed us that he has the ability to kind of rally and get players to rally around him, and it kind of has the X factor that, quite frankly, I haven't seen out of Carson Wentz yet. So I think in terms of getting the team to really buy into who he is as a leader and who he is as a quarterback, and given that he already has the familiarity with a lot of these guys, I think we have a really good shot to win against a Green Bay team that is coming off of 2 bad losses. I mean, they beat the Giants, who I'll give it to them. They're having a good year. But then last week losing to the Jets. So I think this is a very winnable game. Taylor Heinicke had a pretty honorable showing last year against Green Bay, rushed for I think almost 100 yards himself in that game last year. So I think he just gives us a much different style of quarterback play that I think could serve us well moving forward down the stretch here while at least Carson is out. And no knock on Sam Howell. I really do like him as a potential prospect for us. I just don't think he's ready. And I believe the coaches when they say that he's not ready yet.
That's honestly hard to believe coming from you, Chris, that you believe something that this coaching staff has been saying.
I know, right?
I feel like that's contrary to a lot of the points that you have generally made. But no, I have shared the same sentiment on how like he played pretty well in preseason, and he was a intriguing prospect coming out of college. And we very well might see him play at some point this season, depending on how the rest of the season goes, depending on if Heinicke stays healthy and everything. But yeah, I do agree that, it's going to be a nice breath of fresh air for a lot of fans because he's just a lot more likable of a guy than Wentz. I mean, I really don't think that anybody that I talked to that's a fan of this team was really hyped up to trade for Carson Wentz. Although, I've said on this podcast that I think he's probably the best quarterback we've had since Kirk Cousins in terms of just pure throwing the ball. You nailed it right in the head. I mean, Heinicke appears to be a better leader, and he's a guy that people rally around, and he's a guy that people really like to root for because he's a good story. He seems like a great guy off the field. So, maybe this does give this team a little bit of extra juice to try to rally around. Maybe we can pull off some wins. Our schedule as we go into November does get a little bit easier than it has been. So you never know.
Well, you say that, you still have to remember that I'm going to take Carson Wentz here. I mean, the touchdown interception ratio is better. Even this year, he was on track for, I believe, 30 touchdowns and 18 interceptions, which would be still much better than what Heinicke did during his time here. So I'm not excited for it. And I definitely, for the Sam Howell point, I'd just like to throw in the idea that this kid's a young guy who his freshman year of college, he was lighting it up and he just kind of declined naturally. I think that when you put him in this system, he might be able to make something work. You got to give the kid a chance at the very least to try and just show that he can play NFL football and be valuable to a team.
Well, he might get that chance at some point, but I don't think that it's the right move to go with right now. You got to go with the guy that's been there, been in this system, knows the guys. And I think we'll say it again, the most important thing about Heinicke is that he's likable and people want to rally around him. That's my thoughts on why you would go with Heinicke. Obviously, Howell has a lot more upside. Like, I think we know what we have with Taylor Heinicke after watching a full season of him. We know he's not going to beat you necessarily with his arm, like, entirely, but he's a fun player to watch, and I'm excited to see him at the helm again.
I hope he wins me over, but these Green Bay Packers are a tough team.
The Green Bay Packers that just lost to Zach Wilson.
Hey, no disrespect to Zach Wilson.
I mean, no disrespect to Zach Wilson. I mean, I don't dislike the guy. I do think that this is a game where, Heinicke could come out and kind of, start us out hot. We begin every game so damn slow. I think he could provide a spark early and potentially get us, out to an early start here and an early lead potentially. I think if you see Heinicke kind of not perform well or perform poorly for the first, two games that Carson's out, then maybe, at that point, the coaching staff, another 2 losses, if you're looking at like a 2-6, maybe even 2-7 scenario, then yeah, throw Howell in there. The season at that point is clearly a wash, and put the kid in there and see what you got and get an understanding if we need to be looking at drafting a quarterback this offseason or not.
But going back to this Green Bay game, I do think that the Jets are a more sneaky team than people would have anticipated. I was saying this in the offseason. I thought that they were going to be better. Not to the point of them beating the Green Bay Packers, but the Green Bay Packers themselves it's clear that there's a little bit of a drop off in play. We all knew that offense was going to take a hit without Devontae Adams, and it has. It's been tough. It's tough to replace that kind of guy's production when you have a top 5, top 2, maybe even receiver in the NFL in Adams. And it's just shown. Now, this is a team that runs the ball very well. They have a nice 2-headed monster in the backfield with Dillon and Jones. And that's been a lot of the bulk of their offense, kind of taking the pressure off of Rodgers, who might not have the best weapons anymore. So they rely heavily on the run game. And, for when you look at Washington Commanders and our team, of course, that defensive line, they came in clutch for us against Chicago. They're going to need to do it again against a good running attack in Green Bay.
Yeah, I think the really important part of this is to not underestimate the Packers here. I mean, we look at their record and we say, gosh, that might not be a great Packers team. I mean, listen, I doubted Aaron Rodgers the past 2 years. In the past 2 years, he's proven me wrong by winning an MVP. They drafted Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, two very good young receivers who I definitely believe in. Alan Lazard has shown to be a guy that can be a 2, sometimes a 1. Not to mention that offensive line, you have guys like John Runyon's son, who is a former Eagles offensive tackle. His son is playing guard for them right now. He's a good guy. He's good. Elgton Jenkins is on that team. David Bakhtiari. Guys in the secondary like Darnell Savage out of Maryland. You see guys. Yep, Terp, great Terp Nation guy.
Do like Darnell Savage.
Well, not just that though. You have Jair Alexander in there. Eric Stokes, a first-round pick out of Georgia, who's been playing well. I mean, this team is loaded with talent. I think they're just missing that, connection, that chemistry that they had with Devontae Adams there. And I don't underestimate them. This game is going to be my biggest, siren out to those Commanders fans out there.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Tom. I'm definitely not underestimating the Packers here. I mean, I think we're clearly still the underdogs in this game. But when you take a look at the team, they're 3-3. We're 2-4. We're only a game back from Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not saying we're good or anything, or have shown that we deserve to be, kind of spoken of at the same talent level as him or his team. Because overall, like you break down their team, there probably is more talent in more areas for them overall than on our team. I just think that, that they're coming off of 2 straight losses. We're coming off of a win with some extra time in there for our guys to recover. I think there's a good chance for us to kind of come in there and get a win. And I think if we're able to do that, we can gain some momentum, get a little 2-win streak going on and then can kind of keep it going from there. I mean, Heinicke is just like Wentz, known to be hot or cold. And if you get him on a hot streak, he can go for a couple games and keep it going. So again, really, really looking forward to this game. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really important also to mention that this is the Preston Smith revenge game, and this is the Clinton Dix curse game. The Commanders, I don't think, have shaken the curse of either of those players being on the team and or leaving it. And I think that's really important when you talk about the energy that this game is going to have behind it.
So I pulled the stats up, and Aaron Rodgers has a 3-3 record versus the Washington Redskins football team and Commanders. Well, hasn't played the Commanders yet, but against this franchise, he's 3-3. In those games, he has only won in Lambeau. He is 0-3 when he travels to FedEx Field to play this team. This game is in Washington for those that didn't know. So if history continues to repeat itself, Washington is a very tough place for Aaron Rodgers to play.
Well, I think it's a tough place for anyone to play, especially with the health hazards and the other issues which may beset the field at times. But I would heavily advise that if you're doing fantasy or if you're betting on this game, do not underestimate the Packers in this. It will probably be a tight game. If not, the Packers could beat us by a big margin here. This could be their setting off point. Aaron Rodgers has always been a slow starter. I'm a guy that's come to love him over the years just because he's a really great character in terms of what his story is and how he got to his position and what he is now. So it's hard for me. I believe we can win this game, but I definitely would temper that belief with the understanding that Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Fame QB.
I'm definitely not disagreeing with that at all. I think Aaron Rodgers has earned his credit and where credit is due. He's a great quarterback and definitely one of the greatest quarterbacks that we've been able to watch and see in our lifetimes. That said, great quarterbacks can be beaten. Tom Brady can be beaten. Peyton Manning, guys like that we've seen, we've all seen them lose to lesser quarterbacks and lesser teams before. So I'm weirdly optimistic about this, and I think it's just because I've always had a soft spot for Heinicke, and I really like the guy, and I like his style of play more so than what I've seen out of Carson so far this season. So yeah, weirdly optimistic for the game, but again, we'll see what happens, and I think the outcome of this game will do a lot in like telling us about what our trajectory for the rest of the season might look like for us.
And of course, this game is big for Aaron Rodgers' career trajectory as well, because people will always be able to say that he could never get it done at FedEx. Will that change this Sunday? Folks, we're just going to have to wait and see.
And we are going to try a new segment on the podcast. We may be the only podcast this early into the season talking about players whose contracts end at the end of the season. But I think it's important to remember how we feel about these players in the middle of the season, especially when we're talking about whether we will resign them at the end of the season. So we have a new segment here called Sign or Decline. I have a list of Commanders players who have expiring contracts in 2023. And we're just going to go through very quickly, tell you, sign or decline. There may be some that we want to say a lot about, maybe not a lot, but we'll see here. So our first player on the list, and I think it's important that he is the first player on the list, Daron Payne, sign or decline. I would personally say sign. I think that he is a great depth piece. I think that he is definitely a starter. I just worry about what that price tag may be. But I will stick with my original statement and say sign.
I'm going to have to go with a decline, to be quite honest. Although he's a great player, Payne, he's a staple of our defensive line. There's only so much money that can go around. And do you value re-signing him as opposed to re-signing Sweat and Young, who you're going to have to re-sign in a few years as well? I think Sweat's contract might be done after this. He'll have next season, and then I think he's going to be up. And we also just drafted Fedarian Mathis to potentially fill that void. So just from a pure financial standpoint, I'm declining.
And yeah, I get the financial standpoint, and sadly, I think that's the reality of the situation, Clark. However, I would like to see Daron Payne come back. He's very reliable. He doesn't really miss games. He's always healthy. Even when he's a little banged up, he usually finds a way to power through. And we've had some concerns with the interior depth, especially this season. So I would love to find a way to get Daron Payne back on this team. I think, yes, you do have to worry about Montez Sweat, because I think that is he's more deserving of an extension at this point than Daron Payne is. But I wouldn't want to factor Chase Young into that decision at all. I think Chase Young is the biggest question mark out of any of the front four. Allen, Payne, Sweat, and Allen, if you're looking at those four guys. I would love to re-sign him. I think it's a little too early in the season, unfortunately, to be able to tell if we're going to be able to do that. Just based on some other guys that we might be keeping or releasing. I'm going to say re-sign, but with an asterisk based on some other players.
Yeah, and very interesting points you guys bring up. Our next player is Wes Schweitzer. He is a guy that if you're not a big fan, you do not know, but he is certainly a great depth piece. We had him on a 3-year contract that is going to be up. I think we re-sign him. He's a guy that is not going to cost a lot of money. He hasn't done very much. I think that he's good depth. He's been in the system. He knows the system. And that's more valuable than a lot of other guys that are going to be on the free agent market this year. So I would say sign Wes Schweitzer.
Agreed. I'm going to go with re-sign on Wes Schweitzer as well. I think he's a good plug-and-play spot starter for us. Now, he has been a bit banged up this season, which is unlike him. He's been really healthy, actually, the past couple of seasons for us, and has actually been able to come in and kind of keep things moving on the O-line without really, skipping a beat or having too many hiccups in their play. I would like to see him come back. I do like the interior versatility that he has, being able to play both guard positions as well as center in a pinch. I say re-sign.
We can bring him back at a reasonable price tag. I don't see why not, but we've seen other guys like this go and get larger contracts, like one that I think of is Tyne Secchi. He was a really great plug and play offensive lineman for us for a number of years. And then he left when his contract was up and, somebody paid him to be a full-time starter. So unless that happens, we can, I say, re-sign him with the asterisk that we're not paying him to be a starter.
Agreed with you there, Clark. I was thinking that too. And I think if he wasn't, kind of having the injury concerns this season that he was having, I think he would be setting himself up a lot better, maybe for a big payday. I guess we'll just have to see if he's able to come back and stay healthy. And when healthy, if he's forced into kind of a starting role for the remainder of the season for us.
Yeah, and the next guy I think is the one that we really should talk about for a second. Taylor Heinicke is going to have his contract end this year, and I say decline. Now, when I think of Taylor Heinicke, I think of credit card debt because he keeps just racking up money from our team. And I think our best asset here is liquid capital. So don't re-sign Taylor Heinicke. He's a bad player, and I think that there's a lot of value in the quarterback market that you can try and find players who are equal or better than him, and I think that's really what we should do.
Well, I think if you're Taylor Heinicke, these next 4 or 6 games are going to be the difference between possibly tens of millions of dollars for him, because we saw him start an entire season last year and, was fairly average to below average at times. However, I think he's shown that he can be a player that can step into a situation, be a reliable backup and be a guy that can provide a spark for you. If your starter goes down, he's been very good when coming in relief of quarterbacks, not as much when he's a full-time starter. So I ultimately don't think that we're going to re-sign him because I think that there's going to be a team out there that's going to give him a lot heavier of a contract. And if we are, sticking to our guns and sticking with Wentz next season, or we're going a different direction, we see Sam Howell, maybe, whatever it might be, I think that we're going to decline him. And I say that also because I think that he's going to be asking for a lot of money. So I would say decline, not for the reasons that Tom said, but because I think that he's actually going to generate a substantial market for himself in free agency.
I agree. I think there will be market interest for Heinicke, regardless, really, unless he just completely, shits himself these next few games. I think there is a market for him as a high-end backup in this league, especially with a lot of offenses that kind of are looking for a guy that can kind of still fill the role of their starter. He's a mobile guy. He's a guy that he's a gamer. He can come in and still, provide that offensive spark that a lot of backups in this league, really aren't known for or really can do. I think the only way you see Heinicke on this team next year, if Wentz is here, you absolutely don't see Heinicke on the team. I really, and again, I don't know if I even would want Wentz here next year anyway. So hopefully, don't have to make that decision. But I would like to re-sign Heinicke if we can get him to a reasonable deal. However, realistically, I don't see it happening. Kind of similar to the reasons Clark said. Again, I really like Taylor Heinicke. Would love to have him be, fill that kind of Colt McCoy type role for us and be a backup here for, 5-6 seasons and years to come. Would really prefer to have him in that role for us because, we know him. He knows this offense. He knows this fan base and has respect from this fan base. But again, I don't really see it happening. I think, like Clark said, we'll kind of maybe know a little bit more about that situation after these next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at this team, he doesn't really represent a bright spot more as he represents like a fan favorite. Which is a concept that I wholeheartedly hate because it implies that you're not a good player and that the fans just like you. Or it
Terry
implies that you're
McLaurin is
such
a
a
fan
talent.
favorite. Terry McLaurin, fan
Terry
favorite.
McLaurin is an icon, dude. At this point, people really just love him out there in the universe. So, our next few guys though are a little bit quicker guys that we can run through. Trey Turner came in on a 1-year deal, $3 million. He hopefully will not be asking for much. I still would say decline. I think you find a young guy, you give him an opportunity to do something. You kind of gave him his opportunity. You saw that he wasn't what you wanted, and you immediately replaced him. Unless you're keeping him for some sort of veteran experience, decline.
Decline. He sucks. He's been replaced by Sadiq Charles. He's been the times he's been in the lineup, he's getting blown up. He's like a human turnstile. He sucks. Decline. Get him out of here.
For a guy that is a 5-time Pro Bowl selection, and he's not even 30 years old yet.
Washed. He's washed.
That is just unreal for the level that he's been playing at. This is his 3rd team in 3 years. He's going to be on a 4th team next year. Decline. Or maybe he might not even be on a 4th team. We'll see.
He might be done. He might be done if he can't even put anything solid together this season. It might be it for him. Who knows?
We shall see. The next player, Cole Holcomb, great kid, came out of UNC. We had him on a 4-year, $2.7 million deal. He's going to be wanting a lot more money. I'll tell you what, people around the league really love him. I'm a big fan of him. However, do I think he deserves big money? I'm just not sure. I mean, we've said that the linebacking core has been an issue. And then we say that our favorite player is a middle linebacker. I mean, that's a tough look. So I would say decline. I think that there's guys in the draft that we can get, or guys that are going to be available in free agency. I think you find better options there. I like him, but it's just hard. It's hard for me to say decline, but I think it's a decline.
I'm going to say that we re-sign Cole Holcomb, and it's because he has been the most consistent guy in that linebacking group for us. He's still a young player. I think this is only his 3rd year in the league. And I also don't think that his 4th year in the league. I also don't think that his price tag will be too difficult to match or to come up with. I don't think he's going to be asking for elite linebacker play because he knows that he's not an elite linebacker in this league. And I think that down the stretch, if he continues to play well and we sign him to a somewhat team-friendly deal, he still makes his money, but we're not breaking the bank. I think it could be good for us. So I would re-sign him.
Agreed. I don't think there's a ton. I really don't see there being a ton of like interest from other teams on Cole Holcomb. Now, I don't think teams would say no, if we released him and they wanted to sign him to like a cheap 1 or 2 year deal. Yeah, sure. I'm sure he'd get picked up somewhere. I think if we let Cole Holcomb walk, like this isn't the end of his NFL career by any means. He's a good player. He's a solid, slightly above average player, I'd say, or he's proven to be so far. But I agree. I don't think he really will boast a heavy request or a heavy price tag. I think best case scenario, you re-sign him to maybe a 3-year deal that's, like Clark said, team friendly, lock him up for another couple of seasons and then, continue to get some consistently solid, not elite, but solid linebacker play out of really your only linebacker that has proven to be consistent from year to year. So I think the lack of linebacker depth that we have really forces our hand to have to re-sign Cole Holcomb.
Yeah, and just a quick note, I mean, this has been a league where middle linebackers have been moving around quite a bit or have said they want to move around quite a bit. We haven't made a move on any of them. There was Jalen Smith, obviously Miles Jack, who is now with the Steelers, and Roquan Smith of the Bears last game, who wants to move around. Maybe we could get him instead of having to hold on to Cole Holcomb. Now, moving on, the next player is going to be one that I'm sure Clark is going to be ecstatic for, but Cam Sims, 1 year, $2.5 million deal is up after this year. He is a guy that I think we should probably decline. I think we move on, find a guy that has maybe a bit more speed, maybe look towards the draft. I mean, that's going to be my answer for a lot of these guys just because I'm not a huge fan of where our team is at right now, and these guys are kind of a product of that. So I will say decline. He might also want good money considering he's a fan favorite, which I don't think we pay him. Just a decline for me.
Cam Sims, for one, is not going to want big money. I don't know what you're talking about. This is Cam Sims we're talking about. He's spent his entire career here. He's been, early on, he was probably on and off the practice squad. He's found a home here, and I really don't think that there's going to be that much interest for him. So if we re-sign him to a 1 year, $2 million deal or something, who cares? Re-sign the man. People love him. It's Cam Sims for crying out loud.
Yeah, I love Cam Sims too. And so I would like to see him back. I don't think that I don't know if there's any other. I'm sure he would maybe at least make a training camp at another team for sure. I don't know if he'd make another roster. I think it would just depend on how he played in that training camp and what the needs of that particular team would be. I don't think he, demands a ton of money. I think if you don't really, we haven't really seen much play at a Cam Sims so far this year. I think if we don't really see much play out of him this year, and it kind of continues to just be a guy, maybe he gets a catch here or there. I could see him maybe being re-signed for maybe even a deal for less money than he's gotten this year. I don't know. I'm going to say re-sign just because I like the depth. I like to see him back. He is a fan favorite. I do like Cam Sims. Always a good time talking about Cam Sims, but it also wouldn't be the biggest loss if he were to walk.
Yeah, and these next few names we can kind of just run through pretty quickly. Joey Sly, he's a decent kicker. I think the market's kind of saturated on kickers. I think you can find a lot of decent kickers. We really need a good guy. I would say resign for now, but look to replace in the future.
Decline. He ain't it. He's not that good of a kicker. He's surprisingly jacked, which is kind of interesting for a kicker. You don't really see that too often, but that's not going to break it for me. Let's get a new kicker in next season.
Agreed. I think that you bring him back to camp just as kind of insurance, next season, and maybe bring in, maybe a younger guy, maybe multiple guys, right, and just kind of have them duke it out. If at the end of the day, Sly's the clear better kicker out of who you guys have in camp, sure, bring him back for another year. But agreed, I would like to see some competition at the kicking position going into next season.
Clark, that is a great note about how Joey Sly is indeed an NRA member. He has 2 guns on both of his arms, and he has 2 cannons for legs. So, great little comment.
Are they accurate though? Are those accurate guns and cannons?
Listen, it's not about whether it hits; it's about how far it goes. Jeremy Reeves, the next guy on the list, guy that has definitely been a great fill-in player for injury times, but not necessarily a guy that is going to be drawing much interest. He was on a 2-year, $1.5 million deal. I think if we can get him on a long-term one at the same price or even lower, that I think we re-sign him, and I wouldn't be mad to see it.
Re-sign. He's the next to Shazer Everett.
Couldn't agree more. I love Jeremy Reeves. I think he's got a lot of heart. He comes back and plays his ass off every year. I think I think he always looks pretty good. I know he's had some hiccups here and there, but I think he's looked generally pretty good when he's been forced into play. I know a lot of the players like him. I know fans like him if they know who he is. But I think we definitely re-sign Jeremy Reeves. He's a key depth piece for us in that back end secondary, and would love to see him, continue to wear the burgundy and gold moving forward.
Yeah, the next name, Tyler Larson, 1-year, $1.1 million deal, center. A guy that no one should really know unless you're a real big fan of this team. Important depth piece. I really thought he played pretty bad when he was actually on the field. I'm going to say decline and look to replace him with a young guy or once again in the free agent market.
Yeah, I'll go decline. I agree with you, Tom. I'll go decline on him. He's on the older side. He's just an old commander, right? That Rivera's brought in. He's been banged up. Got injured last season. I don't even know if he's been active. Maybe once. Is he back yet this season? I don't even know. If so, he's been a non-factor. If he is back. So yeah, I say decline. Let's get some more younger guys in there. I think I like Keith Ishmael over him, honestly. So. Decline for sure.
Decline.
All right, the next name on the list, F.A. Obata. He had a sack this year so far. He's on a very team-friendly $1.1 million deal for 1 year. I think if we can get him at the same rate, he's not a bad depth piece, especially if we decide to look away from the defensive line in terms of adding new people. I think he would be great to keep on the team. I say re-sign.
Yeah, in terms of just being a pure depth piece, he's shown that he's not, he's shown that he's at least an NFL capable player. Hasn't been, can't say the same for every depth defensive line we've seen on this team recently, but I think that he's an NFL player, and I would hope that he wouldn't be seeing the field as much as he has been next year when hopefully we have Chase Young fully healthy and back playing well. But sure, I'd like to re-sign F.A. Obata. He seems to be at least a decent NFL player.
Obata. No, actually, I like F.A. Obata. I love him getting in there for like a sneaky hit or a sneaky sack. He seems like he's been able to have a little bit of an impact almost in every game, albeit small. But yeah, I totally agree. I think he's been a pleasant surprise as a depth piece for this team. I think, you get Chase Young back, and then your next man up on the edge would, in that case, be James Smith-Williams, who I think has actually looked pretty good this season. But then after him, I think it's F.A. Obata. I've never been a big Casey Hill guy. I really don't get what the coaching staff sees in him. And I think F.A. Obata is clearly shown he's better than Shaka Toney or James Bradley King or any of those other kind of depth pieces for edge rushers. And he's also shown the ability to maybe even kick inside if need be in a pinch. So that versatility, I think, also gives him the edge over some of these other guys. Resign.
Fun fact for you guys. F.A. Obata was raised in the Netherlands and England and is the first player to go straight from a European football league to the NFL in the history of the league. So you have some cool backstory there as well.
Got to keep a guy up with a story like that.
That is definitely a fun fact. And it's perfect that we have something very good right there, because the next two I'm going to bunch together because I think we'll be pretty unanimous on our decision here. And these two represent what I would say is the darkest parts of our team, which is David Mayo and John Bostic, both on 1 year, $1.1 million deals. They epitome what we talk about when we say that we don't like the linebacking core. Now that may just be my opinion, but I'm sure you guys would concurrently agree with it. Let's get rid of these guys. Decline. Let's get some youth. Let's get anything but these guys and see what they can do instead.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If you're listening out there, David Mayo or John Bostic, I'm sorry, but yeah, just we need to get some fresh blood in there. Decline.
Yeah, decline. I would like to see some fresh blood in there, like Clark said, with some more upside. I mean, I actually do have a spot for John Bostic because, those couple years where he was starting for us, and, he does hit hard despite, his poor coverage ability and maybe lack of speed. So I did always like seeing a hard hit every once in a while out of John Bostic. But yeah, David Mayo and John Bostic, unfortunately, at the tail end of their careers. And really the only reason they're on this team is just because we have no one else for depth. So yeah, decline. Sorry, fellas.
All right, and we move on to a very big depth piece for us, Jonathan Williams, a guy who I was not very happy had made it onto the roster over Jarrett Patterson. Now, obviously, his contract is going to be up after this year. It is a very team-friendly 1 year, $1 million contract. I think we don't re-sign him. I like the fact that we have these young guys with Jarrett Patterson and Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, who are leading this backfield. And I don't think that we need a guy like Jonathan Williams just back there for depth anymore. I think that he's kind of useless. He's just a heartbeat, really.
Yeah, and I don't forget about J.D. McKissick too. So this backfield is actually pretty crowded if you think about it. And I don't dislike Jonathan Williams. I don't think he's really done anything for me to hate on him for. I think when he's come in, he's been serviceable and kind of has kind of filled the B-Rob role, I guess, before B-Rob came back. But B-Rob being back on the team and healthy has made him largely irrelevant. So barring a catastrophic, knock on wood, barring any catastrophic injury to, Gibson or B-Rob moving forward, I don't think you see him back. I think you see him back in camp, just maybe as a courtesy thing and because he's been with us for a little bit, but he probably won't latch on again next year, if I had to guess.
Yeah, his production for, what we're asking of him is super replaceable. And if we were going to have to re-sign this guy to another contract that was more than just the base minimum $1 million, it's not worth it because you can find someone else very easily. There's a lot of running backs out there, a lot of running backs that enter the league every year. So I would decline him.
And next we have not Zach Martin. He is on a 1 year, $1 million deal. We've had a lot of talk about how much we did kind of have hopes for not Zach Martin, but not Zach Martin has really kind of hurt us. So I think decline.
Yep, agree with you there, Tom. Decline. Was hoping that he might actually be good. Maybe some of that um, brotherly talent rub off on him, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. I say decline. I think we need to draft another center, honestly, in this next draft because Chase Roullier, when healthy, is solid, but we've seen with when he's out of the lineup, things get a little shaky there at center, and when Schweitzer goes down, damn, it really is not pretty. So yeah, I'm gonna go decline.
Agree. Decline.
That was Nick Martin, for those of you who did not know who I was referring to as, not Zach Martin. Our next player on the list, Daniel Wise, a guy that I think we all really liked in preseason. Have not seen too much of him. He's played relatively well when he's been on the field. I think he's a great depth piece. That defensive line is already possibly losing Deron Payne. I don't think that we should really lose Daniel Wise if we can get him on a really team-friendly contract. Just lock him down for maybe 3 or 4 years. Just have him be a guy that's just there around the game and just helping us, win games. I think definitely is a great idea. So re-sign.
I mean, where's he been though? I mean, I haven't. I don't know if he's been banged up. If he has, I don't really recall. The injury, but I really haven't seen or heard his name pop up on the stat sheet too much. I think if Deron Payne is back in Washington next year, I don't know if you see Daniel Wise making the 53, maybe a practice squad relegation if he's still eligible for that at that time. If Deron Payne walks, I think you definitely see Daniel Wise as a continued depth piece. I don't think you see him step into any sort of starting role unless he kind of comes alive here in the back end of the season and really shows us that he's got that potential. But I think you re-sign him, and then based on maybe bringing in some other guys this offseason and maybe even through the draft, I could see him getting cut, if he's just not performing up to snuff. But this coaching staff does seem to like him, and I don't think this coaching staff, unfortunately, is going anywhere. So I think you see him back here next year. Re-sign for sure, I guess.
Yeah, we're kind of in like the depths of this conversation right now. We're going real in depth about Daniel Wise. A lot of these guys I think are pretty inconsequential whether or not you actually bring them back, because a lot of these guys aren't really seeing the field. And if they are, maybe it's some production, maybe it's not what you're looking for. This particular case, though, I would venture to say that you could re-sign him just because he played well in preseason and could be a depth piece.
I will say that the good teams in this league, their depth are guys that can come in and continue to keep their offense, defense, special teams, what have you, going without missing a beat. So let's not overlook depth as an important piece. Obviously, when looking at depth, you don't want them on the field as much as possible because you want your starters in and healthy. But this game of football, as we all know, comes with a lot of injuries just by the nature of it. So I agree with you, Clark, but I think, depth is definitely not something that can be overlooked at all. And I'm sure you agree with that, of course.
With that. But at the same time, we are getting to the bottom of the list here, and these last three guys are kind of not much of a conversation around them, except for maybe one of them, Milo Eifler, Eli Wolf, who I have never heard of until I just saw his name, to be quite honest with you, and then Rashad Wildgoose at cornerback. Now, of those names, most likely to be resigned, Rashad Wildgoose, in my opinion. He is a guy that's played, he hasn't been amazing, but he's played and he's looked decent while he's been in there. So I think he's definitely a guy that we could keep, especially on a very team-friendly contract. Wouldn't hurt us by any means. As for Milo Eifler and Eli Wolf, I would just say cut them. I have no clue who they are necessarily, besides being guys on the team. And they haven't really fulfilled any sort of hopes or dreams as a Commanders fan. So cut both of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. I know Eli Wolf was just a tight end we brought in kind of right at the beginning of the season, kind of late preseason, just because we had so many injuries there. And I think he actually ended up getting banged up. He's just really a camp body. I don't think you see him, really get back into the mix here. I think Rashad Wildgoose has at least deserved a invite to camp next year. I think if we do this segment again, we need to also include a third caveat, maybe you get an invite back to camp, maybe without a guaranteed signing or anything. So I think Rashad Wildgoose, I think you see him, unless he has like an abysmal back end of the season here and gets benched or replaced. I think you probably re-sign him or at least see him in camp again next year. Milo Eifler, he's really a special teamer for us. So I think he's a little bit on the younger side too. So I think you see him probably in camp again. I think you start to get a little worried if you see him on the field. Actually, for defensive snaps, I think that's not going to be a good sign if we see that. But yeah, I'll give Eifler a training camp, invitation. But again, would not really lose much sleep if he was not on the team next year.
I would have to agree with you on those ones. Again, we're at the doldrums of this conversation. Not exactly guys that are jumping off your screen, but nonetheless, this is the Going Commando podcast, and we will talk about everything and everyone Washington Commanders. So with that being said, we've reached the conclusion of the Going Commando podcast for today's episode. My name is Clark alongside Chris and Tom. We hope you have a good day. We hope you enjoyed. And as always, HTTR and HTTC.